We're good, Tim.
Thank you. I'd like to call the meeting to order. At this time, we can all stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance
To the flag.
To the flag
United States
of the United States of America,
to the
to the republic
which
and
for which it stands,
nation
one nation, under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
liberty.
liberty and
with
justice for
liberty
all.
and justice for all.
Thank you very much. And Kristen, if you'll call roll call, please.
Bruce Angel,
Here.
Mike Thomas,
Here,
Tim Dean,
Here.
Jan Berg,
Here.
and Yvonne Van Ornum.
Here.
Thank you very much. Before we move toward the approval of the agenda, information was given to me that we might be adjusting, or we are adjusting item number 2 on the agenda will now be item number 1, and item number 1 will be item 2. And also just a slight correction, sorry to be detail oriented like this, but we are doing a draft planned action environmental impact statement. Is that true? And not an acton. So we're just missing an I there as well. So, so at this point, I'd like to open the floor to you, Mark, for introductions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this evening, we'll give a presentation by Burke Consulting. They're our consultant for the planned action EIS environmental impact statement for the Cascade Industrial Center, formerly known as the AMIC, the Arlington Marysville Manufacturing Industrial Center. And so this planned action EIS is for the Arlington portion of the AMIC only. And so with that, 2 presenters will be on here. Radhika, is Lisa also joining you? I see she's not on here, but.
It'll just be me.
Okay, so Radhika Nair is with Burke Consulting and she will be giving you the presentation this evening.
Great. Thank you, Mark.
Radhika.
Good evening, commissioners. And I will share my screen, so the PowerPoint will be behind me, but I'm Radhika Nair. I'm a senior urban planner at Burke Consulting, and I'm the project manager for the effort. Give me 1 second. Are you able to see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay.
There you are.
Great. So I'll talk through the purpose of the planned action EIS, some of the timeline and milestones of it, some of the conceptual alternatives that's tested in the draft EIS, and some of the findings, and then there'll be time for discussion and questions. So as Mark mentioned, the study area is the Arlington portion of the Cascade Industrial Center. I don't know if you can see, but there's a small key map here, formerly known as the Arlington Marysville Manufacturing Industrial Center. The now renamed Cascade Industrial Center actually straddles both Arlington and Marysville. The draft planned action EIS, in fact, is just looking at the Arlington portion of the overall center. Yes. The Arlington portion of the center encompasses about 2,291 acres, and it includes the municipal airport as well. So this is the area that we are talking about today. And the planned action EIS builds on the Subarea Plan process that was done for the Arlington Marysville Industrial Center. The Subarea Plan was informed by a market study which looked at the kinds of uses that would be feasible in the center. And it had a lot of community and stakeholder engagement. We had stakeholder interviews. I was the project manager for the Subarea Plan as well. So We did stakeholder interviews. We did an online community survey where we got about 85 responses. We had a vision public workshop where we presented some findings on existing conditions and talked to the community about what they wanted to see happen in the center. And it was also a very well attended workshop. We had close to 80 to 90 participants. We had a stakeholder advisory committee meeting where we had representatives from different agencies and city staff and technical staff from both Arlington and Marysville. We had a draft plan workshop, which similar to the vision workshop was very well attended. And leading up to the adoption of the Subarea Plan itself, there was a legislative process with hearings and other opportunities for comment. So the draft EIS builds on these activities and the process and the vision of the Subarea Plan itself. In terms of what the purpose of an EIS is, an environmental impact statement or the EIS, it's an informational document for decision makers. It shows you what kinds of environmental implications exist and what measures can mitigate those implications. And the way it does that is it develops conceptual alternatives or just bookends of what could happen or scenarios for what could happen in the future. And it uses those scenarios to test what the implications are. And in the draft, you will see 3 conceptual alternatives, and I'll talk through those in more detail. But once we get comments on the draft, we'll develop a preferred alternative, which would be the preferred future scenario. A planned action EIS is a little different from a programmatic EIS in that the planned action process is beneficial for economic development because through the planned action EIS, you do more comprehensive, really detailed environment analysis early and upfront during and at the area planning phase. And this means that future projects in the study area which meet the conditions that we study will not require individual SEPA determinations. And this really simplifies the process and helps clarify timelines and is really an economic development strategy. In terms of the timeline, we started this work in spring. We had a 21-day comment period where we took comments on the scope of the EIS, the initial ideas on the alternatives that we might look at, the study area, and we got a few comments that I'll talk through in just a second. And right now we have released the draft EIS and we are in the 30-day comment period, and the draft looks at 3 alternatives for the future and we'll gather comments on that. And then once the comment period finishes and towards the end of the year, we'll respond to comments and we'll choose a preferred alternative, which would be the way forward. And we expect council action on it early next year. I wanted to talk a bit about the scoping comments. One of the aspects of the EIS is there are certain procedural steps that one has to follow, and one of it's the public scoping notice. And that was posted online and sent to parties about any comments that one might have. And we did get a few comments. We got a comment from the Department of Ecology that we should look at state regulations that apply regarding dangerous waste. We got some comments from community transit that when we study and test the conceptual alternatives, we should look at how transit demand would be affected. We got detailed comments from WashDOT on the scope of the transportation analysis, what it would cover, and which led to subsequent conversations with them. And while we didn't get a formal comment, we did have communication with the tribes on the alternatives and impacts of that. I'll describe the 3 conceptual alternatives that are included in the draft EIS in a second. But one thing I wanted to touch on is the vision for the Cascade Industrial Center, or the AMIC. the Arlington Marysville Industrial Center. And as one of the 10 manufacturing industrial center in the region, the vision is for it to continue as a manufacturing and industrial employment center. But the Subarea Plan did focus on the need to attract job-rich industrial activities to the area, and sectors such as aerospace, advanced manufacturing, robotics, food processing, maritime, and wood products manufacturing. Those were all identified as desired sectors that would be a good fit for an industrial and manufacturing center, as well as a good fit for a regional center within Snohomish County, which has existing strengths around these sectors. The way the EIS is set up, like I was saying, there are 3 alternatives, and we would compare among alternatives just to test a range of ideas and just prompt conversations about the area's future. The first one that we set up is called a no action alternative, which basically means that it'll be existing conditions. It would be current comprehensive plan and zoning, nothing would change. The next or the first action oriented alternative would be alternative 1. And what we do in alternative 1 is we think through what could change from existing conditions. And in alternative 1, we see that as implementing the Subarea Plan. So it would include some ideas around sectors and other things that I'll talk about in a second. And alternative 2 is just a high growth alternative. It is similar to existing conditions in many ways, but it does add more jobs. And I'll talk through the 3 conceptual alternatives in a second, but once we test and disclose all of the environmental implications through these conceptual alternatives, we'll develop a preferred alternative. And to develop a preferred alternative, we can mix and match. We can combine all of these things together, or we can take specific pieces of it together, or we can even say alternative 1 is the preferred alternative. So that process we'll do after this draft EIS period. So the first alternative is called the no action alternative, or existing conditions. So it would continue the current zoning and regulations. So industrial and manufacturing uses would be allowed and continue in the CIC, and there would not be a planned action. So there would be no facilitation or of environmental review. So there would be the encouragement for new development or redevelopment that would happen if a planned action was adopted. The majority of the study area is zoned for industrial and aviation uses, and those would continue. There's very little housing in the study area right now, and no housing would be added. And we did find through the Subarea Plan process that some type of entrepreneurial support, like incubators or workforce development, would really help create that sustained growth for industrial activity. And none of those things would happen without some action from the city, but the no action alternative does not anticipate any of that. I'll talk about the number of jobs and the number of housing units and population differences among the alternatives. But the no action alternative is one that assumes that the least amount of jobs would be added to the center. Alternative 1, which we have indicated is in initial discussions, at least seeming like a preferred alternative, is based on the vision for job growth, geographical distribution, and sector mix of the Subarea Plan, which means that we would anticipate and put in place things that would attract the sectors that I earlier mentioned as part of the Subarea Plan, such as aerospace, advanced manufacturing, robotics, food processing, maritime, wood products, and those sectors. And employment uses would be designed to take advantage of the area's natural features and a relocated Edgecombe Creek. And in addition to all of these high density job-rich manufacturing employment, we do anticipate that there would be an incubator or any entrepreneurial support or workforce training facilities that would be newly established on the airport business park site that's immediately west of the airport. And the idea is that these kinds of facilities would support the industry sectors that were identified in the Subarea Plan. And along with this diverse industrial development, this alternative also assumes that there will be a small amount of residential growth, primarily housing that would fit the industrial workforce and could fit within the character of the area. So live-work units. So housing like that is conceptualized with this alternative, which we tested. The second action alternative, because the existing conditions is the no action alternative, is a high growth alternative. So in this case, we're not testing things like the addition of workforce development facilities or the addition of housing. We are just assuming that there will be high growth and that the growth would reflect existing patterns and that it would happen on all parcels where there is capacity. And we do anticipate that there's enough growth that the creek relocation would happen when, as I mentioned earlier, no housing increases and no workforce development facilities would be added. And existing patterns are that almost half the jobs in the center are in manufacturing, but there's also about 20% of jobs in warehousing, transportation, and utilities. Those are not typically super job-rich sectors, but if existing trends continue and without additional investment in workforce training or those kinds of entrepreneurial support, we expect that there will be growth, but it will be in existing sectors. So those are the three alternatives that we studied in the EIS. In terms of the number of jobs, the no action alternative tests a total of 9,793 jobs, which is basically adding about 4,800 jobs to the center, essentially doubling the 4,900 jobs that are there right now. Alternative one would be we tested a total of 11,594 jobs, which is adding about 6,000 jobs to the center, 6,625 to be precise, which is like a medium growth alternative in terms of jobs. And then alternative two would add a total of about 13,800 jobs, which would, compared to what's there now, add about 8,844 jobs. In terms of housing, we currently have 332 units there. The no action alternative would not change it. It would just continue that. And alternative two would also continue that. There would be no new housing added. As I mentioned, the alternative one, which is the one which implements the Subarea Plan, we did assume that there would be a slight increase, about 516 units of increased housing to just support the increased industrial activity. And reflecting the increase in housing, alternative one, which is the one that implements the Subarea Plan, also has a slight increase in the resident population of about 1,300 people. So with these alternatives, we tested what the environmental implications would be. And some of the high-level findings are presented here. And I can share some of the chapters that are included within that really long EIS. And it has a summary, which is a good summary of all the topics that we studied and the implications. And you can go into any detail as needed in subsequent chapters, like the proposal and alternatives describe the alternatives in greater detail. Chapter 3 goes through each of the topics and describes implications in more detail. And chapter 4 and chapter 5 are more procedural and has some references and a distribution list. In terms of the topics that we studied and what we found that for the natural environment, there were similar results under all three alternatives. There were limited critical area impacts. And with new development and higher standards attached to new development, there are opportunities to advance green infrastructure for all alternatives. For cultural resources, which is one of the topics we studied, there's no difference in impact between any of the alternatives. No previously unrecorded archaeological sites or historic properties were identified through an extensive survey that we did for the DEIS. But it is recommended in the DEIS that the DAP be consulted just to determine need on an individual basis. I'll talk about transportation in a little bit more detail in a second. For land use and aesthetics, similar to the other topics, the idea of concentrating industrial activity in a manufacturing industrial center is consistent with state and regional policies. And all alternatives provide capacity for new growth. Alternative 2 provides the most capacity for new growth, while alternative 1 provides the medium capacity. The types of development that we anticipate in terms of height is similar among alternatives. We do recommend the creation of industrial design guidelines just to make sure that any transition between uses, any impacts of that can be mitigated. For utilities and public services, most of the infrastructure is in place already, and anything that is not in place, the city has started to plan for it already. And some of the infrastructure will need to be upgraded as redevelopment occurs. And it's, like I mentioned, the city has begun planning for that. And in terms of police, schools and parks, we didn't find any significant adverse impacts because those impacts are primarily driven by population or retail. And there's very little of that in any of the alternatives. We do know that the city will implement system plans, and that will make sure that as growth happens, infrastructure is in place. I wanted to spend a bit of time talking about transportation because that is a topic that we studied in great detail for the manufacturing industrial center, and as an industrial center, freight especially is really important to its success. So we looked at existing non-motorized facilities, we looked at transit, we looked at the freight corridors. And what we found is that while all three alternatives would increase trips, there would be no significant or unavoidable impacts that are because of the action alternatives. And part of this is that several intersections already operate at LOSF, even without the action alternatives. So changing that, it doesn't affect it. There are some intersections which have poorer operations under both the action and the no action alternatives, but some of those are considered significant and unavoidable because it's related to the action alternatives do not necessarily cause those impacts. And then there might be some secondary impacts related to widening of SR 531 as part of the proposed mitigation for the action alternatives, but those are considered unavoidable as I mentioned. And then reducing the reliance on just car travel within the study area is expected to help with reducing some of the secondary impacts. The map on the right shows the many transportation improvement projects that are already planned in the area, both in and around it. And this will help with the connectivity, especially as the area grows and new street connections and things are added. The draft EIS also includes a planned action ordinance. It has several sections related to how exactly future development could come in and fit in under the planned action ordinance. And it shows the area where the planned action ordinance would apply, which is the study area that I showed you. And then it has a checklist and some mitigation measures related to the ordinance. And the two key criteria that will be used to apply the ordinance are the land use. You would have to be a qualifying land use, and we've defined manufacturing and industrial land uses in the draft ordinance. And you would also have to show the number of trips associated with your development, and so long as it fits within the number of trips that we've studied in the preferred, which we haven't filled in yet because we don't have a preferred yet, then you would, if you fulfill both the land use condition and then you come within the trips that we've tested, then you'd be able to use the planned action. And the mitigation measures in the ordinance, if you look at it, they follow from the EIS. A lot of the things that the EIS says should be done in the ordinance, the planned action ordinance will become shalls. And all of the topics that we studied in the EIS, like natural environment, cultural resources, transportation, land use and aesthetics, and public services and utilities are also in the planned action ordinance. And for transportation, we would require a SEPA mitigation fee based on demand from new development. And the cost estimates, we've included a cost estimate in the planned action ordinance, and we'll refine that with the preferred, but the idea is that it's based on the proportional share of trips that this development would generate, and we'll adapt it for the preferred alternative. This, as I mentioned earlier, is the comment period for the draft EIS. We have a month-long comment period, and we want to hear from people about any questions they might have about the conceptual alternatives or any concerns. And it's the EIS is up on the website, and Mark is also taking any comments by email. Once we get the comments and Planning Commission reviews the conceptual alternatives, we'll move on to council review. And we'll also develop a preferred alternative, which will be within the range of what we studied in the draft EIS. And the final piece of it would be council adoption, so that a new development that's proposed can use the planned action. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and take any questions that commissioners might have.
Great, thank you, Radhika. So any questions?
Yeah, I have one. I noticed there was a reference to a change in definition of level of service to allow for funding of multimodal transportation. In your experience, has that been tried other places? And if so, how has that worked?
I'm actually the land use and the prime consultant, so I will check with our transportation consultant for places where a multimodal LOS has been implemented successfully. But the way it works is that since we test if intersections can meet the city's adopted LOS standard, and if it fails, if the city's if it doesn't meet the city's adopted LOS standard, in some ways, adding capacity can influence the ability of other modes, and that might not be the best answer. And that's why there is the recommendation that another thing to consider would be to just think about LOS from a multimodal standpoint. But I will talk to Transpo about examples of cities where a multimodal LOS has helped in securing funding and respond to you.
Because you did note in a number of intersections along 531 are projected to be at a service level F with no fix, particularly. I'm just wondering how we handle that.
Yeah,
Rather than live with it.
Well, or provide alternate means.
But provide alternate means that
mhm,
relieve enough traffic.
Correct.
Thank you.
thank you.
But that also lends itself to the connectivity, because if you give multiple points of connection, you take that load off of the main line, so you give people alternate routes of access, and you start to reduce those triggers on those intersections. So it's a two-sided equation here, or actually three-sided equation. So, you provide for alternate modes of transportation, you provide for multiple routes in order to alleviate your congestion on your
Yeah, sure.
intersections and reduce that level of service or increase it.
We also recommended the intelligent transportation systems, which similar to connectivity and allowing alternate modes can also alleviate some of the congestion.
How, you also mentioned a possibility of a program for transportation demand management. My impression is that has varying degrees of effectiveness
Mm-hmm.
depending on the jurisdiction. So did, when you looked at that, did you look just past the possibility of establishing those standards, or just as a possible way to relieve congestion?
We looked at it as a possible way to relieve congestion, but I can also check on transportation demand management for industrial areas that are standards that would be particularly suitable for the CIC.
Thank you.
And I had basically the same question as Bruce did, so I'm eagerly looking forward to your findings on that, on transportation. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
One, are the comments we're getting, the few we've gotten, leaning toward a particular alternative or a mix of alternatives?
From the comments?
Yeah,
No, I mean, we've discussed the alternatives. And of course, there is we've arrived upon one that would be a preference for sure, because it gives you a better broad spectrum of development within the CIC. And so looking at that, what do you need to do to supplement that? Maybe tweak some of the effects of alternate one, incorporate some of the items within alternate two, so that you're looking at it as a larger development, gives you a little more flexibility.
yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And I will provide some clarifications to commissioners' questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Radhika. Have a good
Bye.
evening.
You too.
So at this point, I believe we are going to now move on to item number 2 on our agenda, which would be the final draft of the Housing Action Plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is a discussion item this evening. I will be giving a presentation later on to both Planning Commission and Council on the Housing Action Plan. I just want to encourage all of you to review this document and to provide comments back regarding its organization and any additional information or different direction that you see that would be more suitable to the action plan. But I open this up to an open dialogue, and we can discuss some of the items within the document this evening. So has anybody read the document?
Yeah, and I have a question.
Yeah, I was looking too, for what it was that I was. But go ahead, Bruce.
Okay, I'm a little confused, I think, about, on page 13, at the bottom paragraph, toward the end of it, it says, because the city recently adopted municipal code amendments to allow triplexes and courtyard apartments in the Old Town residential zone. I know we adopted the new zoning descriptions, but we haven't applied them anywhere, have we? Or did that become automatic?
No, that was within that was within the changes. And so as we looked at that, we looked at the missing middle housing,
Yep.
but it was contingent upon strict design guide or design standards, which we've budgeted to develop in the upcoming year. And so in order for you to be able to build, duplexes, triplexes, quads, you would have to submit your plan and it would have to emulate the design regulations in the context of the neighborhood that it's going in.
But does that then apply to everywhere in the city or just Old Town?
2 zones. It's in the residential moderate capacity and Old Town residential.
So, okay.
So without the zoning map in front of me, so when you're looking at that RMOC zoning, majority of that was in Smoky Point and some of the older established neighborhoods. But it's also contingent upon density increases can't occur until utilities are supplied to those neighborhoods. They're currently on septic, and so they couldn't increase their densities without having sewer to service those neighborhoods. But Old Town is already serviced by water sewer, so. But the
Yeah.
same thing would hold true there. They would have to abide by the development standards in order to build that type of housing.
So we got rid of some classifications and added others. I thought we just added some. I didn't know we substituted.
Well, what did we get rid of?
Well, I don't, low, medium density. I mean, if we're,
Well,
because we don't, that would be substituted by residential moderate capacity, right?
yes, but that was renamed. It didn't get rid of it. It still meets the same densities. The RLMD did to low capacity residential. So you ended up with ultra low capacity,
Right.
low dense or low residential low capacity. You ended up with residential moderate capacity, residential medium capacity, and residential high capacity.
Okay, because I misunderstood the process. I assume we created those zones, and then the second step was to apply them to a particular area.
When the definitions were given for each one of those zones, it was specific as to what would be allowed. And that one was definitely specific because it did require the development standards to be in place before they could build.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And what,
My question was on the same page, 13, and it was about the feedback. And I was just curious how much feedback was received, if it was like 4 people or 200 people.
Feedback was, the initial count was somewhere around 160 to 180 comments that came in.
Okay. Better than 10. That's good.
Oh, yeah.
so a question I had was, on page 17, you're talking about creating a housing trust fund. Was there any more discussion on how we're going to create that or any creation of that?
No, these are just, these are action items, and if you look at the implementation schedule, which is going to be, I think it's page 26. Yeah, right here. So if you look at the dates that, for the programmatic items, you'll see the years that those are listed out. And so these are things that we're looking at in consideration. But as you see, they're not implemented until the earliest would be like year 5 with programs. Some of the other items are already underway or in place. So that's why it's 0, because we're already beginning those processes.
Okay.
So it's not like a housing trust fund will occur overnight. You know, we have time to be able to look at it, to evaluate whether the program is really something that we want to try and work towards and implement. But it does give us the ability and does identify programs that we can work towards.
So on the accountability piece on this, who would be, or what entity is basically kind of overseeing this to see that progress is being made and, you know,
That's-
some connectivity with it? Kind of what I mean by that is, you know, once you have something that's 3 or 5 or 10 years out, you know, very often it sort of gets diluted before we get to that time. Is there, who oversees this?
That'll be an internal process.
Okay. Okay.
And so, you know, as we do that, I mean, that's for our own benefit. So if we continue and monitor where we are in our progress, and we have metrics established for that, when we come up to the next cycle of renewing our housing needs assessment, that data is there in order for us to be able to review and implement a new housing needs assessment. So it's kind of a checkpoint for us.
Okay. That's all the questions I had.
I was wondering, I'm trying to find it now. I can't remember what section it was in, but with talking about the housing trust fund, I can't remember, is this, if you qualify with another nonprofit that can help you with your expenses, could they still qualify for this trust fund too?
They might, it depends on where we are and what kind of criteria we establish for that. You know, there's multiple programs, but it's just a thought and a process as to whether or not we want to try and create a housing trust fund. There's variations that we could do with that fund, but definitely this is going to take quite a bit of research and dedication from the elected officials to see whether or not, number one, that's something that can be budgeted, and number two, what's your return on investment on that type of a program. So we'll have to evaluate that, Yvonne, before we would ever implement it. So this is our framework for our housing action plan. And so it's not a plan that gets set on the shelf. This is a plan that we'll be actively reviewing and updating as time goes on. So that's why I recommend you really look at this thoroughly, because this will be a document that Planning Commission will be heavily involved in.
I got a question too. Again,
Yes.
on page 9, the value capture. I mean, I'm trying to understand how that really works, and I think I got an idea. But is that in place in other places in Washington? Are people doing that?
It is in place, and it's complicated. And so it's something we're gonna have to really sit down and wrap our heads around.
Okay, that's, yeah, it's like, wow.
It is, it's very complicated and we really, because of our land use code, we really kind of do that already because of requirements we have for development as it occurs in the city. And so we kind of capture that up through the development process. So, you know, it may not be overly beneficial to us. It may be more onerous than it is beneficial. So we have to evaluate that. But like I said, these are just items for us to look at and evaluate. And that's why the timeline you look at that on the implementation schedule gives us that time to be able to look at this, evaluate it, and decide whether or not we want to implement these programs. None of this is
Okay.
locking us into any of the action items that are in here. Now, the things that are important that you need to consider are the strategic objectives. And so if you're in agreement with where we are with the strategic objectives and as being our priorities, then that's step number one. If you're in agreement, that's what we want to do. We can always change the action items to fit the objective itself.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I might have missed it. Are the comments that you received somewhere where we could review them?
They were posted on the city website. I don't know whether they're still up or not, but if you'd like to see those, we could definitely capture them and make them available.
Okay, I'll check the website first.
Okay.
Thank you.
Looks like no further questions.
Okay. Well, moving along.
Okay, let's move along then to the next item. Number 3 on our agenda is letter from Planning Commission to City Council. So as you are most likely aware, did everyone receive a copy of this? If you didn't receive one? Okay, so
I saw it on the agenda, but I didn't actually, was I supposed to get one like in an email?
no, I think what it
Oh,
was,
okay.
this was something that was provided in there. And as you're aware, out of the 9 items that we had made aware of when we moved towards our recommendations to City Council, our recommendation was that this would be an item that would be adopted, and it was, of course, the only item that was not. And so when that happened, and some of the comments that were made, we decided that it would be best if we address those in a formal fashion. And so what had happened is we created this letter. Prior to going into this letter, though, I'd like to kind of give you a little bit of background for those who weren't here last year when we were working on this. I'm going to make a few comments, and then what I'd like to do is open it up to Bruce and Mike to see if they have anything to add to what I have. If you're not aware, York Park is a neighborhood park that is located in Smoky Point area. It's on a corner lot, and to the east of that corner lot is the house with a detached garage that is the subject of what we were working on in the rezone. It was purchased, or it's been owned by the city for quite some time, and it was then voted by on city council to go into surplus and therefore be sold. We've had several people take a look at it, And it looks to me like during feasibility, they have come up with the conclusion that the property wouldn't be able to be actually developed into something that was cost effective without running utilities to it. And therefore running utilities to it would therefore make it so that they would have to do something more than single family residences. And I don't know the minimum amount of units that would be necessary to make it cost effective, but that was the understanding on my part, that that was the reason why this was not purchased by anyone. So when this happened, the last year when we voted on this, the commission came out on a tie vote, which is 2 votes to 2. And during that time, meaning that that actually constitutes no recommendation to city council. So then it went in front of city council last year, and at that time was voted down at that time. Again, this year we went ahead and looked at it again. It was back on the docket one more time. We voted it as unanimous, and as well as the park commission had done the same thing. So before I talk any more about the park commission, I'd like to open it up to you, Bruce, and to you, Mike, if you wanted to add anything to what I had just said.
No, you were accurate as far as I can remember. Yeah.
And you, Bruce, did you have any more you wanted to add to this?
Well, just, are you going to read the letter that Parks Commission sent to council?
Yes, I am. I just
Okay.
wanted to make sure that we kind of had the background for everyone first before we proceed.
Yep.
So,
Oh, except for one thing, Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
I need to add that it was the recommendation of Parks Commission last year that the proceeds from this surplus be applied to the Parks Capital Fund, and they expressed some interest in using it to start looking at community parks along the Smoky Point corridor. But the important part is that the proceeds from the sale of the surplus land went to parks.
And that was going to sort of be for the purchase of that park and or seed money towards the purchase of another. And that would have been a community park in Smoky Point. Wasn't that correct?
Well, whether it was seed money or how that was structured remained to be seen, but it was a fairly decent amount of funding to start with.
Okay.
And as usual, parks, I assume the development of a community park will be a combination of financing efforts. But that was certainly a key element.
Thank you. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and read the letter that was sent to City Council or Arlington City Council from the Park, Arts and Recreation Commission, better known as PARC, PARC, regarding the York House zoning decision. And this was dated on September 30th, 2020. The members of the Park Commission are very disappointed that City Council has once again overlooked Park's recommendations for acquiring funds for a second park in Smoky Point by rezoning to sell the park at York Park, or sell the property at York Park. Like you, we care deeply about the quality of life in our city, and the city parks accomplish several goals: outdoor recreation, gathering places, and green space. Parks are classified in our comprehensive plan as regional, community, and neighborhood. York Park was built for and serves as a neighborhood park. The Arlington Park Commission has recognized that Smoky Point needs additional parks to support the growth of the area and to provide a, quote, center, end quote, for Smoky Point. This goal has been in the Park and Recreation Plan for many years and is a priority for the Park Commission. Park members spend time every year visiting every park in Arlington, reviewing opportunities to acquire other parks, debating how best to use our limited park budget, and how to best serve the community. We spend many hours over many months forming our recommendations and sincerely believe that our decisions are well-founded, well-researched, and in the residents' best interest. Since you ignored our recommendation for the second time for rezoning the York Park House parcel, so it would be more viable to sell, despite the Planning Commission joining us in our recommendation, we wonder if our work does not add any value to your deliberations. We understand the complex decisions you face in zoning questions, but in the absence of any new funding for parks, we look to creative ways to move forward. Your vote frustrated our progress. We wonder if we need to regroup with City Council to better understand your priorities for parks in Smoky Point. And that's the end of the letter. So this time, I kind of wanted to go down the list and see if anybody had any questions or comments. And at this point, I'd like to start with you, Jan. Did you have any questions or comments on that?
So reading the letter, it looks like the council had two concerns. One being the spot rezone. And then the other, the classification of the park. So I guess the bottom line is, what was their reason for not approving the rezone? Was that their two main arguments?
And that was my understanding as
Okay.
to the main arguments. There was one third one where perhaps the property should remain vacant for future housing. So what we have done here, guys, is we've went ahead and created a letter that we would like to send that would join, of course, the letter that was sent from the Park Commission. I believe at this time, Mr. Director, is there anything that we need to do as in a vote on this, or is this something that we can go ahead and just approve or just send on its own?
Well, you're gonna have to make a motion and recommendation for me to take it forward to council and discuss at council.
Okay.
I do want to add a little bit of additional information here besides the two letters, because Jan, you did bring up an important point, is that this was referred to as a spot zone. I want to give you a definition of what spot zoning is in the state of Washington. And so spot zoning has come to mean arbitrary and unreasonable zoning action by which a smaller area is singled out of a larger area or district and specifically zoned for a use classification totally different from and inconsistent with the classification of surrounding land and not in accordance with the comprehensive plan. Spot zoning is a zoning for private gain designed to favor or benefit a particular individual or group and not the welfare of the community as a whole.
So with that definition, clearly that's not what this is.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
And
And
so,
what I'd like to kind of emphasize, guys, is that under I don't know the exact RCW, but spot zoning in the state of Washington, I believe, is not legal. So what it is that I feel like that at some point, maybe someone somewhere along the way was asking us to do something that was misunderstood as being illegal. And of course, staff and of course us, we would never request that we make decisions on something that would, you know, in the beginning is illegal. So I kind of wanted to emphasize that point, that we would never, you know, staff of course would never put something in front of us to, you know, discuss and to vote on that initially is something that is illegal. So I wanted to kind of make that point.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I would also say that in my experience on the commission, there are really two definitions for spot zoning. One is a commonly held one, a common language definition, referring more to the size of a zoning change than to anything else, and it has no bearing on anything. It's just a common description. And then there's a legal definition, which Mark just gave us. And Jan, you're right, this rezone has nothing to do with that. In fact, if you were just to use the commonly held definition for spot zoning, almost every rezone request in the docket for the last few years would have been classified as an illegal spot zone if all you're referring to is the size of the area to be considered. That's not how you define a spot zone.
And Mark, what you just read, is that the attachment that's going to go with this letter?
That is correct.
Okay. Well, in my opinion, I think the letter captures and gives facts to their concerns. And I think that's what probably would be helpful for the council, is to stick to the facts.
I think that's what this letter is intended to do.
Yeah.
The
I
other
agree.
thing it's intended to do is that if council's view of the growth, or if their desires for the growth along the Smoky Point corridor differ from our conversations for the last few years, we should talk about that. Because we're making some assumptions about what their view is, what their vision is. If it's incorrect, we ought to get together and correct it.
The letter that looks like the letter that was written and the attachment were from Steve. I mean, isn't it from 2017?
Correct, because this issue came up back at a rezone request on the docket in 2017. So this definition was given to council at that point in time to clarify, because of course, a member of the public was incorrectly using the term spot zoning as part of a rezone request. So this was clarified with council at the time. I just wanted to make sure that that everyone understood that this is not a spot zone. And I just want to make sure that everybody is very aware of what the definition of spot zoning is. So, of which we would never do, as Bruce has pointed out. It would be unethical and illegal for us to bring anything forward that would be considered a spot zone.
I was just pointing out the year because I thought it was interesting that it's coming up again. And like you're saying, I mean, we're having to talk about it
It's
again.
great information, it's a great definition, and it just needs to be reiterated so people understand that term. But thank you.
I have a question. Was this a unanimous vote? Or split by one? I'm just curious.
Were you talking about the commission vote or the council vote?
The council vote.
This one was a
It was a 4-3.
4-3.
Okay.
With the chair's permission, I'd like to make a motion.
Please make, chair requests a motion.
I move that the planning commission request staff to forward this letter from the planning commission to city council expressing our concern regarding council decision on the York Park rezone.
I second it.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any further discussion? Thank you. It sounds unanimous. And we will move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the resolution for establishing a center of excellence within the airport business park. I think.
Thank you,
this is-
Mr. Chairman. And so this has really come forward after numerous conversations we've had with different stakeholder groups regarding a section of the airport business park, which I will refer to as the upper triangle. So the intent of this is actually to place this 35 plus acres in a position that it's not open for development without a specific need and reason behind it, which is identified in the resolution itself. So we've identified this area as a center of excellence for training, specifically towards advanced manufacturing, and like I show in the resolution itself, this is for long-term support of advanced manufacturing industries, especially in the development of robotics, artificial intelligence, advanced materials, additive manufacturing, instrumentation, and aerospace technologies. So we'd like to establish this and kind of make sure that those elements are recognized and this area is devoted to the building of those facilities that support the items that are within the resolution. And as you can identify here, so this is along Airport Boulevard. This is where, I don't know if you're familiar with where Station 48 is being built currently, but it's identified right there in that corner. So coming from the south, the bottom of the sheet coming up, that's 43rd Avenue that comes up to the airport property line there, just to give you some idea of where this location is at. And if you might recall, we established a 200-foot buffer around the airport. So there was a significant buffer between the residential uses and the airport business park uses. And so that's why you see the layout of the conceptual pads the way they are, and with that tree line that's kept in place to provide for that perpetual buffer. As well as the 200-foot buffer around the area, there's also a buffer between each one of the developed areas, which is 75 feet in width. So I just want to bring your attention, this is something that will be going forward to City Council, but I would definitely like to get some feedback on the resolution itself and answer any questions that you may have this evening.
Is the date correct on the bottom of the first page?
Of the resolution?
Or of the map?
Yeah,
Of the 18th day of December?
yeah.
No, it was just, it's a date, it's a placeholder. It's not
Okay.
necessarily the date that it will be going for approval.
I was like, did I miss something?
No, I actually had it in a highlighted, but then I would just dropped the date in there for my placeholder, but no, it is not the date that, well, I don't even know how that works out on the calendar, but it is just a placeholder, Mike.
Okay.
I have a couple questions. But,
Go ahead, Bruce.
okay. What was the genesis of this? Did it come from other places that have tried it, or did that generate internally, or?
This is generated internally.
So so you've established this area that's going to be limited to certain uses.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't happen to come along in some prescribed time, is there a kind of an assumed sunset provision to this?
Well, there isn't one in the resolution itself, simply because, we're working towards this. This is really an establishment of this area, and it's really the future of the CIC. This would be providing for training facilities to support the clusters that develop here in the Manufacturing Industrial Center and in the advanced technologies. And so we're starting to see quite a bit of interest in the Arlington area in order to have advanced manufacturing here.
So you've gotten some response to this concept from the market?
Oh, definitely, yes. And plus, there's been conversations with higher education as to whether or not they want to be involved in this in a partnership. So I'm not gonna be at liberty right now to tell you who it is, but these conversations are occurring, and so we're trying to progress this through, but what's happening right now with the manufacturer, with the airport business park, is that there's quite a frenzy on the leases right now, and so what we're afraid of is that as property starts to get leased out, which is a good thing, we want to make sure we can preserve an area in order to be providing for training facilities and higher education to support these elements within the CIC. Because once that property's gone, it's gone. We won't have the ability to establish this.
Is there more? We got the resolution in the packet. Is there more information about, or there is, about the restrictions? That is what it is you're allowing as a use for that area? I mean, you have that documented somewhere.
Well, that'll all come out of a couple of things. One, it'll be coming out of the planned action, because that's what we're trying to do, is develop those clusters and entice them into the area. You know, we get input from the Port of Everett, we get input from EASC with the county, our own input from potential developers in the area and the interest that they're showing. So it is all geared towards this industry.
Yeah, well, we've talked about that for a long time.
Right.
Calls it different things, but yeah. Okay.
The question I had was, is there incentive for companies to come in and utilize this type of space?
Incentives in this particular area or just in general?
No, in this particular area. I mean, it just, since it's being kind of carved out as this, you know, special type of place. And
Well, the incentive is it's for development and support of your industry clusters that'll develop here, so that you have a highly trained workforce in order to fill those jobs of the
Right.
businesses that are locating in the CIC.
so it's really an incentive for everyone. I mean, the way it sounds like to me, it's
Correct.
it's somewhere for local people to go to get trained. It's going to have trained people to be utilized in the industry that's close by. And then, so, wow. This is it.
They have areas like this and specific things at Painfield and Everett
Okay.
already.
So this is
Right,
similar.
and that most of that was with aerospace. You know, we're looking at a little different industry cluster
Yeah.
for the business park. That's why it's identified in the resolution. But yes, you are correct, Mike.
Yeah, that's really the only question I had. Thank you. Any further questions?
Nope.
All right, if that's everything, I guess we'll move on to our final item on the agenda today, which is number 5, which is the unique interiors design review.
Yes, so the applicant, David Rowe, is seeking design review approval to remodel the existing exterior facade of the current unique interiors building at 126 Clude Avenue. The building will be consistent with the existing use, which is allowable in the Old Town Business District 1, with the doors facing east for the facade. So I do have, based off of the submittal that was submitted for September 30th, 2019, and the submittal for September 29th, 2020, I do have 5 conditions. They are provide indirect light to the sidewalk by lighting elements in the street environment like trees, walkways, canopies, and entryways. Provide clear, well-lit paths from parking areas to the street and building entrance. Building should not orient large areas of the walls to the street. This would be the south side facing the parking lot. Use modulation, articulations, and clear rhythm to reduce the perceived size of all large buildings and in general, buildings should be divided and given human scale by using articulation and remodulation at a 40 to 50 foot maximum intervals. And based off of that, staff is recommending revisions be made prior to design review approval for the unique interiors PLN 617.
So your primary concern is on the alley side, correct?
So it was the south side. It's labeled on the alley side on this, I guess, on this document right here.
Yeah.
But the side that Kristen's waving her hand over faces the side which faces the parking lot, which is open to all the street to see.
Have you had any response from the comments?
I have not since the most recent comment.
I thought we discussed this quite a while ago.
So did I.
That is correct. They came back with, they had some planning issues originally where they, weren't really ready to move on with doing the project itself, but now with things have changed, they are proposing to move forward at this time.
And so with the items that you're suggesting or what has been your feedback on that?
I have not received any feedback from the applicant at this point. It is pretty typical though that from this specific architect that I not hear responses for some time and then he would most likely get back to me at some time of his own choosing.
Because when I first looked at this, that my concern was the exact concern that you had brought up, was the elevation that has the hand over it right now, and that wall facing, if I were to speak, it would be the darker gray on the left, and
Right.
how that doesn't fall into the usual guidelines or that we have. Is that correct?
Yes, and the whole side as well, since it doesn't really allow for any significant modulation. The panels would be, it looks like, infaced in the building itself and don't actually provide for that bump out, which is required by our code.
And so the part that you're talking about being a bump out, is that this type of artwork that's on it?
Yeah, so those are actually the old metal panels on the existing structure that they have incorporated into the current wall. But they do not come out of the wall at all. They're flush based off of last discussions.
Okay.
Aren't the old pieces in the roof?
Yes.
Well, it's
Imagine.
kind of art, right? I mean, it's okay. So we're not doing any
Yeah.
voting on this today, are we?
No, this is just a workshop item.
Right, okay. Yeah, and I like the front of it. And you're talking about, which is the part that faces McLeod?
So it'd be this panel right here with facing the
The
cloud.
point that faces straight out onto McLeod, kind of right across the street from the fire station almost, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So, okay. I mean,
would just
I
be-
like that part of it. It looks to scale and it has nice glazing and covering. And you said that you've requested they add lighting. Is that right?
I believe on the original lighting plan, they didn't have anything pointed out to show that they had lighting going to the sidewalk. But it looks like they have them placed in, so I will update that.
Okay. That's all I have. Any other questions or comments today, guys? Nothing more? All right, then that will be our last item on the agenda. At this time, we have nobody for public hearing, is that right?
You are correct.
Okay. So Chair requests a motion for adjournment.
I'll move to adjourn.
Or second, whichever Jan prefers.
Either way.
All in favor? Aye.
I
Fine.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
thank you.
Thank you.